Moving on to market timing, and obviously market timing is going to impact valuations. Things like access to capital and the debt and equity markets. Bill, can you tell me about how you take into account the overall market conditions when you're advising your clients?
Typically, my advice has always been move forward till they tell us we can't go any further. This year was a little different with the virus. We had a client, or almost a client, back in March, and one partner wanted to retire, the other wanted to stay. He was a little bit younger. And then the whole virus situation hit, and they said, we just need to hold off because we don't know what the impact is going to be on the business. And actually, we have a meeting coming up in a couple of weeks with those guys. They had one bad month, April, and businesses bounced back, and they're going to be about where they were last year, which is a very nice, profitable business. A number of years ago, the last time the world ended, as people might remember, the housing meltdown and the bubble and all that stuff. And right when we were going to go to market, the whole world was ending. This is when Lehman collapsed, and everybody thought this is the end of the world, which happens every 10 years, in case you're forgetting. And the chairman called me up and said, should we halt the process? Should we time it? And I said, it's impossible to time the process because we're just going to market now. We're not going to be closing a transaction for half a year or thereabouts. And so we don't know how things are going to look. And so I would always caution people to try and time the market, because these processes will take 6 months, 9 months, whatever the case may be. And it's just impossible to forecast what the world's going to look like in 6 or 9 months.
Mm-hmm. Great points. Michael, you want to talk about market timing and that impact on valuation?
Yeah, I would just call it timing. So we do say timing is everything. So market timing implies just the market, but a lot of times the timing is specific to that company. So they're about to land a huge contract. They're about to introduce a product. They're about to resolve some major litigation. They're about to hire a new CEO. And so those are the things that may have an impact. And so it's A, market, what the markets are doing, and then B, what's specific to the company. The other thing about markets is it's really almost industry specific. So you think about, what we're going through this year, there are certain industries that are booming. I mean, they're sensational, and other industries that are doing very poorly. So very often it's, not necessarily market, but I'll say industry specific. So those are my comments.
Great points. Simon, your comments on just the market and Michael talked about kind of internal timing versus external timing, but you want to just add to that?
Yeah, I think market forces drive uncertainty, and it's uncertainty that will cause issues with a process. We had it here in the UK with Brexit a few years back. No one expected that. Processes were in full flow, and then the vote went against staying in Europe, and then all of a sudden there was probably 6 months of uncertainty where the market was really quiet. Processes were pulled, and then everyone gets back to normal, and nothing changed in the decision. It's just that uncertainty whilst people saw what was going to happen, and then they got back and said, look, the world is continuing. Let's just get back and continue doing deals. So, that's obviously a bit of what's going through at the moment. I was speaking to a client yesterday whose revenue has fallen 95% over the past year compared to last year. It wouldn't be the right time for them to go to market. And yet we're in market with another asset that, is growing strongly, still doing acquisitions. And on that business, we're going to get a very strong valuation based on pro forma earnings. That's just the difference with timing. And I think, Michael and Bill have both said that.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, I completely agree with what Michael and Simon said. And this, listening to their examples, what I'm always struck by is in M&A, this is a microeconomic business. It's not macro. So in other words, if you have a company that's doing very well, but the economy is doing very poorly, guess what? You're going to find a buyer who's going to pay a lot of money for it. If you have a company that's doing poorly, but the economy is on fire, no one's going to bid for it, or they're not going to bid that much. So this M&A really is microeconomic as opposed to macroeconomic.
And the one thing that isn't changing is the private equity market still has lots of money to deploy.
Correct.
And I think Bill's, absolutely spot on there in the sense that if you've got a poorly performing business, it's still not going to sell in that environment, in private equity, but they will pay a much higher price for the assets that are performing well. But you've also got to remember, even if you're going out in a booming economy, your business is booming, there's no uncertainty in the market. We've often had, the main buyer pool, you certainly see 3 or 4 businesses that are absolutely spot on for our client. And then suddenly they all announce that they're making major acquisitions. We had one a couple of years ago on a business we were selling for 150 mil to the US. It's the best fit, the most likely buyer was suddenly announced a 2 billion acquisition. 150 mil is very small in that scheme of things, and they're just not going to be interested in or have the resource to play on both of those deals. So it does come down, as Bill's just said, very much it's that micro market and looking at, not just the economy and things, but who you are particularly selling to, and are they ready to do a deal at that time.
Correct.
Great point, guys. I mean, yeah, it sounds like it's very deal specific in terms of the timing, and I like your point on macro versus the micro side.
You can steal it. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Awesome, guys. So that was a great conversation on valuations, and please join us for our next masterclass.